It started quietly, almost unnoticeably, with a handwritten note taped to a gas pump in Detroit. No gas. At first, it seemed like a minor inconvenience, a temporary glitch in the system, but within days similar signs began to appear across Michigan, Minnesota, New York, and, soon, in towns and cities far beyond. The message was spreading, and so was the panic. Gas stations, the lifeblood of American mobility and daily routines, were running dry, their pumps covered, their lots eerily empty. The cause? A bitter trade dispute between the US and Canada that had suddenly become very real for millions of Americans, disrupting the flow of oil overnight. News broadcasts showed long, snaking lines of cars at every open station. Drivers waited for hours, hoping for just a few gallons, while many were turned away empty-handed, frustration mounting with every passing day. In cities like Buffalo and Minneapolis, life ground to a halt. Commuters stranded on sidewalks, school buses parked indefinitely, delivery trucks sitting idle in lots. The ripple effects touched every corner of society. The shock was palpable. People stared in disbelief at empty pumps, asking how the US, major oil producer, could face such sudden scarcity. The sense of vulnerability was new and deeply unsettling. The answer lay in the Midwest, where refineries are built specifically for heavy Canadian crude, not the lighter, domestic oil. The infrastructure was never designed for this kind of disruption. When that flow stopped, the entire system collapsed almost instantly, exposing a critical vulnerability in America's energy network that few had ever considered. As days passed, anxiety and frustration grew. Local news was filled with stories of canceled plans, shuttered businesses, and even emergency services struggling to find enough fuel to respond to calls. Empty gas stations became haunting symbols of a broken partnership and a nation caught off guard. Political decisions made in Washington and Ottawa had cascaded down to the street level, turning what was once a simple trip to the pump into an impossible daily struggle for millions. The crisis was no longer abstract, it was a daily reality, reshaping routines and forcing families to make difficult choices about work, school, and even food. For millions, the familiar rhythm of everyday life had been upended, replaced by uncertainty, adaptation, and a growing sense that the world had changed overnight. The crisis began on March 4, 2025, when the Trump administration imposed a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian and Mexican imports. The announcement sent shockwaves through the business community and across North America, as leaders scrambled to understand the full implications of such a dramatic move. This escalation followed an earlier 10% tariff on Canadian energy, which had already strained relations and raised costs for American consumers and industries dependent on Canadian oil and gas. The White House cited national security, blaming Canada for border issues and fentanyl, claims Canadian officials quickly refuted, calling them misleading and unsupported by evidence. In reality, data showed fentanyl and irregular migration from Canada were minimal, with most illicit drugs entering the US from other sources. To Ottawa, the tariffs felt like a political maneuver, not genuine policy. Canadian leaders saw the move as an attempt to score points with US voters rather than address real security concerns. Canada responded with over $100 billion in counter-tariffs, targeting politically sensitive US exports, orange juice, bourbon, motorcycles. The retaliation was swift and carefully calculated to hit key American industries. The message was clear: if the US weaponized trade, Canada would fight back with equal force, rallying public support at home. Mexico joined in, targeting US agriculture with its own tariffs, further escalating the standoff and deepening the rift between the continent's largest economies. Decades of integrated supply chains began to unravel, as companies faced new barriers and uncertainty about the future of cross-border trade. Businesses on both sides, long reliant on free trade, were suddenly caught in the crossfire. Many small businesses, already operating on thin margins, faced existential threats. The wall of tariffs provoked retaliation, shaking the continent's economic foundation and sending markets into turmoil. The trade war was no longer theoretical. It was hitting wallets and jobs, with layoffs and closures spreading across North America. Political posturing had real-world consequences, fueling public anger and deepening divisions between neighbors and allies. The North American economy trembled under the strain, as uncertainty and fear spread from boardrooms to kitchen tables. The era of seamless trade was over, replaced by a new age of barriers, suspicion, and economic instability. As the trade war escalated, Canada made a drastic move, restricting energy exports to the US, a step that would have far-reaching consequences for both nations. The idea was controversial, but the stakes were rising by the day. Canada supplies about 4 million barrels of oil daily to the US, a supply not easily replaced. This vital flow of energy fuels American industries, transportation, and millions of homes, making it a critical lifeline for the U.S. economy. Ontario, Premier Doug Ford, led calls to use oil as leverage, arguing it would hit the U.S. where it hurt most. He insisted that Canada's resources could be a powerful bargaining chip in the escalating dispute. The threat included not just crude oil, but also natural gas, and refined products flowing through cross-border pipelines. The entire North American energy network was suddenly at risk of disruption. The mere suggestion rattled U.S. energy markets. Investors and analysts scrambled to assess the potential fallout, as uncertainty sent shockwaves through the financial sector. Ultimately, Canada initiated targeted export reductions, citing technical reasons, but making the political message clear. The move was carefully calibrated to maximize pressure without causing total collapse. Key U.S. refineries saw their supply slashed, forcing them to scale back production and scramble for alternative sources. The result? Immediate fuel shortages in the Midwest and Northeast. Drivers faced long waits, and some stations ran dry within days. Canada's oil weapon forced Washington to confront the real cost of the trade war. Political leaders faced mounting pressure to find a resolution. The move was a calculated gamble, painful for both sides, but especially for American consumers who saw prices spike and supplies dwindle. The crisis was no longer just about tariffs. It was about energy security, national stability, and the vulnerability of critical infrastructure. The impact was felt instantly, rippling through communities and businesses across the continent. The stakes had never been higher as both countries realized just how much they depended on each other, and how quickly that balance could be upended. The brunt of Canada's oil retaliation hit the Midwest and Northeast hardest. States like Michigan, Minnesota, and New York rely on refineries built for Canadian crude. When the supply dropped, these refineries couldn't adapt. Production of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel plummeted. Gas stations ran dry, cities grew quiet, and public transit was slashed. Farmers couldn't fuel their equipment, threatening harvests. Trucking and delivery ground to a halt, leaving grocery shelves empty. For millions, daily life became a struggle. Getting to work, school, or the doctor was suddenly uncertain. The region's hidden dependency on Canadian energy was exposed. The political dispute was now a personal crisis. The fuel shortage isolated communities and suspended normal life. Canada's decision to restrict oil exports sparked fierce internal debate. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith opposed the move, warning it would damage Canada's reputation and economy. She insisted Alberta wouldn't consent to using its resources as a political weapon. Industry leaders echoed her concerns, fearing the U.S. would seek new suppliers and never fully trust Canada again. The Trudeau government faced a dilemma: appear strong against U.S. tariffs or heed Alberta's warnings. The rift between energy-rich western provinces and Ottawa deepened. The export reduction was a gamble, abroad and at home. Canada's unity was tested as never before. The fuel crisis was just the beginning. The auto industry, built on cross-border supply chains, ground to a halt as parts and vehicles stopped moving. Assembly plants in Michigan and Ontario faced shutdowns, threatening tens of thousands of jobs. Small businesses suffered too. Costs soared, deliveries stalled, and customers vanished. A furniture maker in North Carolina faced a 25% tariff on Canadian lumber. A Canadian farmer lost access to U.S. markets. The pain rippled outward. Bakeries, restaurants, and retailers struggled to stay afloat. Prices for groceries and cars skyrocketed. Consumers cut spending, fearing for their jobs and wallets. The trade war's economic fallout was everywhere. What began as a political dispute had become a full-blown crisis. Everyday life was upended from factory floors to grocery aisles. As November 2025 ends, the US and Canada face a fractured partnership. Emergency measures may ease the fuel crisis, but trust is shattered. The weaponization of trade and energy has left deep scars. Both governments face internal pressure, reluctant to back down. Diplomats scramble for a way out. Negotiations, new trade frameworks, or even court rulings. The crisis forces both countries to rethink their economic ties. U.S. industries may seek new suppliers. Canada may look beyond its southern neighbor. The era of seamless North American integration is over. The empty gas pumps of 2025 are a stark reminder. Even the closest friendships can break under pressure. The lessons of this crisis will echo for years to come.